How's it going, everyone? My name is Nick Lanza and this is the Fat or Dapper, and I am a huge fan of traditional styles of hat wear. From pork pies to fedoras to trilbies to even Stetsons. I love hats. I think they're great. I personally wear them both as a thing to complement my outfit and also to beat the heat in casual situations. But a comment that I receive fairly frequently, shall we say, is that the fedora is something that should be forgotten, laid aside, let to rest, whatever the case might be. People say it needs to be let go of because of its now more negative connotation in current society. Well, today I want to break it down and show why you should actually embrace this piece of hat wear, going over its history and how we got to where we're at as a culture when it comes to this very simple and humble piece of headwear. That said, let's dive in. This is the Fat or Dapper, and today I'm making the case for the trilby and fedora. Now, let's start off fairly basic. What it is. It is a piece of headwear. It was originally created in the 1880s, actually. Theater kids rejoice because this one is for you. In 1882, there was a stage play literally called Fedora being put on by the Vaudeville Theater in Paris, or Théâtre du Vaudeville. The main character, a Princess Fedora Romanoff, wore a felt creased hat similar to this as part of her costume, and it exploded. People loved the look, and this was definitely a win for whoever was doing the costumes because it has become a staple now for over 120 years. Now, bear in mind that this was a piece of women's clothing for the better part of 40 years. It was not really accepted largely, according to my research, by the masculine population until around the 1920s when Prince Edward VIII wore one on a trip to the United States. So, based on this bit of history, clearly it was something shared by both genders in Europe, but not so much in the rest of the world. However, after this visit in the 20s, it became synonymous with power, respect, and social elegance. It was worn by everybody after that. So here we are, it's now mid-20th century America, and this hat is everywhere. Worn by the highest of society to the lowest of lows. Everybody has one. It's kind of a normal fare. It's something that you would see everywhere. And for good reason. They're not just stylish, they're practical. You see, if you look at the history of men's hat wear, throughout most of history, it either served one of two purposes, either decoration or function. And what I mean by decoration is that it showed where your place in society was, what your class was. It had more formal purpose to it, or with function, it was used for what it was used for. You might have a large wide-brimmed straw hat if you're a farmer working out in the field and don't have any sort of shelter or shade. You might have a hat that keeps your hair in if you're working in the food industry, or if you're working in the medical industry so you don't have foreign things entering into the very sensitive spaces you work in. There is a purpose behind what you're wearing. In fact, most pieces of clothing that are more fashion driven are actually built out of militaristic function. Getting back to that decoration side of things, some of the hats we use today, like berets and things like that, were in fact for military class. The cravat, a tie, was originally worn by soldiers from Croatia. It just shows that fashion is very much tied into different social constructs, of which many are military, which I thought was interesting. So now we have a piece of headwear that can be worn by either gender, styled up and down the spectrum, and it works for any given environment. I mean, what's not to love, right? I personally love the look for myself. Maybe some other styles not so much, but this is probably one of my best hats I own. So if it's such a great piece of clothing and headwear, why do people scoff when they see you wear it? Why is it such a derided, or shall we say, negatively looked upon piece of historical clothing? Allow me to introduce you to the worst sides of the internet. With the dawn of the information age in the early thousands came a wide range of people's interests and hobbies landing on this thing called the World Wide Web. And that meant that there would be forums and pockets of people that were congregating in conclaves all over the world digitally. This led to the rise of shut-in cultures, where people were not going out anymore to interact with the world. They were more and more staying inside. To the level of now we have words for that in different cultures, like in Japan, where the word is hikikomori, or someone who is completely withdrawn from society. People in these types of environments, people who do these types of things, tend to care less and less about their personal hygiene, and thus began the term of the neckbeard. Ironically, some of the most powerful people in our country's history had neckbeards at one point in time or another, but that's a different discussion for a different day. Because of this complete disconnect from society and people trying to interact with society while not understanding it, there became this very divided and divisive culture within the neckbeard space. And unfortunately, it meant that they were looking for ways to kind of assert their superiority that they somehow felt that they had, and thus grabbing a fedora was the way to do it. They looked to people like the gangsters of old and said, I want to exemplify that, but have none of the social class and etiquette behind it. It makes people like myself who love this style feel like we have to defend ourselves every single time we want to wear something like this outside. It's really disheartening. Now, as the internet began to develop and more people started using it, and the information age really took off and grabbed a hold of all of us, leading us into the now social media age, we hit the year 2013, and the now exceptionally infamous photo went viral. Some people know it as the Fedora guy meme, other people call it the tips my hat, my lady meme. It just encapsulates a lot of what you expect from people who wore fedoras during this time period. Now, believe it or not, it's actually a fairly old photo, even by that time period standard, because it was Jerry Messing, the guy in the photo. It was his way of trying to put himself back into the acting space, because he was on Freaks and Geeks, which is something from the 90s and early 2000s that had some decent popularity behind it, but he was trying to get back into acting. And it's sad that this photo managed to land itself on the internet and became the symbol of neckbeardom, and unfortunately also became the symbol of fedora wearing. You see, we had a generation of young people that were on the internet and exploring new concepts and ideas that they'd never seen before, or didn't have a full grasp or understanding of, whether it be because of not checking out vintage stuff for themselves or their parents just kind of moving with the times. And so their first exposure to the fedora is this photo, and suddenly all of the people who associate themselves with that photo. Add to this, even more social stigma came around the thing because of things like bronies and the My Little Pony universe. I cannot believe I'm talking about this, but here we are. For whatever reason, a cartoon designed for little girls became really popular with older middle-aged guys, and the stigma just writes itself, honestly. Then you had people trying to make themselves look cool and mysterious, so they add a fedora into the picture, and instead of actually successfully doing that, it becomes a caricature of what it really was all about. And in the process of this caricature being created, the stigma continued to grow even larger until we got to where we're at today. But here is the saving grace for these hats, and it's the fact that vintage everything is coming back in full force. From people absolutely obliterating thrift shops, trying to buy up as much vintage clothing as possible, to the revivalist movement within groups like P.D. Walmo, there are people who are very much wanting to have all the old fashions and styles back instead of the modern ones. They are rejecting modernity, literally, in favor of to what they might see as authentic or just more themselves of a style. I don't know how to really describe it. For me personally, I've always loved vintage style. You know, I grew up in places like New York City where there is a very large history within the mob and everything else being there, and you see the photos of these men and you go, wow, those guys look great. you don't necessarily associate the very bad things that they did as a kid, but you sit there and go, man, those guys look like they know what's up. They are about business, and I wanted to dress that way, and that's how I got to where I'm at. For me, I was disconnected enough where I didn't know about the neckbeard meme thing until much later. We're talking like 2018, 2019, before I finally was like, wait, that's a thing? I didn't realize that was a thing. Wait, bronies? What? Who does this? What is this? I don't understand this. And then of course, the doors just blew open for me, and my hope for humanity was extremely damaged that day. But the big thing is that Gen Z and the newer generation, they like the older stuff because it has character, because it has history. There's a rejection of modern ideals. There is a return to something that seemed more stable, and the push to go back to nature that started in the pandemic and really exploded as people started taking a look at what was on the labels of the things they were buying. The return towards the more vintage style, I feel like, was just kind of a natural progression, and people embraced it. So now we're at a crossroads where the golden age of internet's over here and the golden age of fashion is over here, and they're coming together and they're colliding, and they are fighting over what's acceptable. What we have is a group of people that took a symbol and an icon of great fashion heritage and history and just everything that associates with that, and they completely shattered it. They completely rewrote it for themselves and ruined it, frankly, for the rest of us. Frankly, I feel like if people were starting to dress better and dress well for any given occasion, these would make a bigger comeback and a stronger comeback, because now you don't have to carry an umbrella. You don't have to worry about wearing a baseball cap. In fact, frankly, these give you better sun protection than modern hats do in general anyway, given the fact that you have full 360 degrees of sun protection instead of just, well, that narrow band in the front there like a baseball cap does. And while I don't think that the use of this hat will ever be normalized, I would hope and pray that people would start embracing the fact that it is a piece of history, a long-standing piece of history that existed long before a bunch of idiots on the internet decided to try and use it for their own personal gains and clout. I wish people would give it a shot, give it a chance, because you might find that you actually like the style and might be able to embrace it for yourself. Case in point, I actually got my dad to wear one of my hats. Now, granted, I have a much larger head than he does, right? My genetics are just enough different where I'm a size 8 or 7 and 7/8 depending on the brand, and he is a 7 1/4. But we did find one that was more his size, and it looked great. In fact, it reminded me of some of those old gangster films when he wore it with the suit that he had on. And with all that said, let's see how badly I get wrecked in the comments section, because the truth of the matter is that I kind of expect it to happen. But I also hope that people will hear me out and recognize that not all who wear this hat are neckbeards. Case in point, I made sure I shaved for this episode. I love each and every one of you. Thanks for stopping by. And we'll see you guys on another video. Peace.